It's Don here from the board. Thanks for coming along and checking out one of our videos. Now this week I didn't really have terribly much happening. Didn't have anything that I had time to build as such. Didn't have anything particularly cool gadget wise and so forth, anything keyboard related, but I thought I'd go back and revisit something that I'd actually purchased a little while ago that I hadn't actually done a video on. And what I've got in front of me is actually a second-hand YiHua 936 soldering iron station. So I picked it up pretty cheap on Gumtree, which is kind of the Australian version of Craigslist. It's sort of an open market trading post of kind of thing. It's not really an eBay. There's no feedback system and things like that. But anyway, the particular seller was looking to go overseas and was offloading a whole bunch of stuff, and as part of that, this was what they were going to get rid of. Well, not get rid of, but so much as that they were selling. Now, they had actually bought it on eBay with a bunch of spare tips as well from, I can't remember if it was the same seller or not. However, it was a pretty good deal price-wise, and I thought I'd get in on that. Incidentally, I'd actually bought it before I got the TS100 in, and so I kind of had it, but then I didn't have anything to build, and then the TS100 came in, and I decided to use that to build the Let's Split. And I haven't actually done any full builds with this particular iron yet. All I did was I pulled it out and I tested that it was working, so I was satisfied. I didn't have to make a claim against the seller in case there was a problem, and that was that. So as you can see, it's a pretty big case. I've got a ruler right here. This is the default box. It's just over a foot in length. It's got quite a lot of weight and heft to it, and now naturally, because this is second hand, it's not going to be in absolute new condition, as well as the fact that what you see inside is not factory default either, because of the fact that it's going to have the extra tips. So just cracking the box open, there's the main unit itself, there's the pen, the wand, which is down here, and then there's kind of the accessories box, which contains the actual tips, the spare tips that he purchased, and the holder plus the sponge. Now I'm not going to bother with the sponge, but I will pull the holder out, and some spare tips. Let's take out the main unit. Bit of the paperwork, and then of course the wand as well. Now this box is kind of just coming apart on me there, as you can see, but that's okay, because thankfully the seller did actually strip it in another box, which was what it actually came in, perfect size that it came in. So I'm just going to pop that straight back in to stop that from falling apart even more. Okay, so the 936, the YiHua 936, so I just tilt that up so you can actually see the front of it, is essentially a copy of the old classic Hakko, from what I can tell, from what I've been told. Now this is an analog dial, of course, as you can see here. It doesn't have a digital display. It does have a heating light, and then that's obviously where the pen goes in, and that's meant to be a calibration point that you can get a screwdriver and a fine screwdriver and turn it, which does not come with it. Now it does have a sticker on the back. It's made in China. It's got a 240 1 amp, so it's not, you know, the most beefiest of units, but I think there's really no issue at hand with that. The dial moves pretty nice. It's very smooth. It does have some instructions that come with it. If it will focus, there we go. And it's just very basic things about cleaning, connecting the connectors on it. Specifications. So power consumption for the 936 is 45 watts, according to this. So 24 volts for the actual pen, and it goes from 200C to 480C, and the dimensions are 120 millimeters by 93 by 170 millimeters, and it weighs, I think, about a kilo or so in weight. And then there's actually a nice diagram that shows the different tips available for it, plus an exploded parts list for the actual iron. Not that it's very helpful, because even though it's got an exploded parts list, it doesn't actually specify what each of those parts are. So if you wanted to get spares, you kind of have to somehow get hold of someone who's going to have them and say, it's number 6 on the pen, whatever that number 6 is. And then also in this was actually the invoice from when they bought it, so you can see they'd actually paid $45.45 plus shipping for the actual iron. So it's pretty cheap, all things considering. 45 bucks brand new. It's actually cheaper than the TS100, to be honest. But of course the TS100 is a very different iron. Now, it's got supposedly electrostatic discharge safe plastic handle. The end of I wouldn't say it's the softest, but it's got a good amount of flex in there. The cable's pretty soft, which is nice. The grip is in a good position, and it just has a little bit of a clear tubing on the front that you can take off, and just like that. Just got the chisel tip on there, a blunt chisel tip at the moment. The top housing, null, just comes off like that, and then you can actually change the tips, and there's the ceramic heater inside. Fairly standard, as you would expect. There's nothing terribly flash about it at all, but if it does the job, it does the job, right? Simple. So let's just go through a couple of the different tips that are actually available that will suit it. Now, any of the original YiHua tips for the 936 series should fit it, but they actually bought a 10 pack of different types. So you can see it says for the YiHua 900M series, there's another chisel, there's another angled chisel, there's a point small chisel, a rounded tip right there, another chisel. It's a lot of chisel pieces. Really massively fat one right there, and then quite a sort of sharp angle, almost a scalpel-like edge blade there. And I think by default it came with these ones in it, which is a round point and a fatter chisel and a smaller circular angle point. I don't know what their formal names are. I'm not that super into soldering iron tips, so I can't really say terribly much about that, except for the fact that they exist. So there certainly shouldn't be a problem getting replacement tips if I ever do need them. But what I thought I would do is thought I'd just actually plug it in, turn it on, and just show you, how fast it heats and so on and so forth. And then of course there's the actual holder, and the wand goes in. It's a little bit on the loose side, but to be honest, that's not really an issue because the plastic is contacting. It doesn't really get hot down there. It'd be nice if it actually sat in snugly without having to push it really far in. It does have metal on the bottom, so if you have any drips from your solder, it's not really an issue. That said, they've taped the bottom of it to stop the actual plates from falling out. So yeah, nothing too flash there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that all the way down. I'm going to put that in the holder, and then we're going to turn it on, and then we can check it out and see how quick it performs. I probably want to jack that in, so it's just a standard 5-pin. Just push it all the way in, and then screw that in. Now you can see it takes up a lot of footprint on one's work surface, so that's just something to be aware of if you're going to get one of these, compared to say a much smaller footprint type of iron that you could expect from say like a YiHua, because I think the YiHua is actually a little bit smaller than that, even though I don't own one. I'm just guesstimating here that it is. Now I've got my leaded solder, which from my research, it should sort of start melting at around 180, and the lowest setting on this is actually 200. So if it's accurate, then I should actually be able to melt some solder at the lowest possible setting on this. I got those plastic plug things to protect the baby from sticking her fingers into PowerPoints, and it's defeating an adult as well. There we go. Success. Just put that there. There's is there a power switch on this? I can't remember if there's, yeah, so there's a power switch on the side over here. You can see that on the camera there. Okay, so in it goes, and then let's turn on the power. You see the light at the front, it's turned on, indicates that it's heating. So we're just going to solder over the top of my brass cleaner here. I don't know how many seconds that was, but it's probably only 5 or 6 seconds. So we can see how fast that tip's going to get melting. It's been about 10 seconds now. The light's blinking. It's still doing its thing. 20 seconds. 30 seconds. Now I'm just gonna, I can feel it's heating, but obviously the heat's not transferring to the tip very well. So we're now at about 40 seconds. That's about getting to a minute now. So it's a minute, and we still haven't had enough heat transfer to actually get through at the lower setting. Now I know most commonly people will solder around 300 degrees on the actual dials here. So 300 Celsius that is, especially because the TS100 also starts at 300 by its default temperature. So what I'm going to do now, because we've been waiting about a minute, it's very slow. Just going to, let's rack that up to 300. Okay, so let's see what happens when we go up to 300 with this tip. I can see there's some smoke coming off it right now, so it's definitely heating up much faster, and that was only 15 seconds. 15 seconds, and look at that, it's starting to melt my solder. So 15 seconds from 200 degrees to 300 degrees, and it's very effective. It's just absolutely dissolving that away. So I would say that's pretty effective. Just clean that off, nice and shiny. Look at that, just melts straight on it. Alright, so let's just drop that back down again, because obviously I don't need to go any higher than 300 to actually work with this. So let's just take that back down to 200 and see. It's still melting. It's still retaining quite a good heat to it. Now of course, if you're not using your tips, you're meant to tin them, so I've been told, for when you put them away. So this is kind of good for that. But it's really interesting because if I put my solder up here, you see nothing's happening to it. And then when it hits that edge, it just magically dissolves. So the heat transfer of that ceramic tip is really crisp. It's just right to the edge of these. So now it's starting to slow down because it's cooling. It's still dissolving quite well, it's just not as instantaneous. There's a briefest of seconds where it just sits there before it ends up disappearing. So I'm going to say that you probably still can solder at 200, but you're probably not going to have a very good time. It's very slow, and you're just not, look at that. It's taken a while, but it's a very, very slow melt that happens on that. So I'm just going to finish up with this. Just going to give it a light. Look at that, now it's not even doing anything. I think we've got too much heat transfer loss, and it's cooled off enough that it's actually not dissolving. Interesting. So let's go back up a little bit. Let's go to say about 250, just because I actually want to end up tinning this anyway before I let it cool off. It's probably about 5 seconds. So come on back up. Still smoke coming off it. Yep, there we go. So that only took about 10 seconds to go from 200 degrees to 250. So now it's still quite slow in melting, but it's certainly workable. It's nowhere near as nice as when it had the 300 degrees on it. So just going to put a generous amount there, and we're going to turn that off and let that cool. Now, of course, I'm just going to have to hold that in place until it cools down. So you can see this YiHua unit, it works pretty quick when you're working at high temperatures. At lower temperatures, at 200, a minute later it still wasn't at a hot enough temperature to actually be able to do any soldering. But 10 seconds later, 15 seconds later, after turning it up to 300, it was ready to go. I would imagine that if I had the finer tip on it, the smaller tip on it, it would actually heat up even faster, simply because there's a lot less to actually heat up compared to this big fat tip that I've currently got on it. And the fatter tip obviously holds, temperature much better, because as you saw when I dropped it back down to 200, it took a while for it to actually cool down enough to stop being able to melt the solder very quickly and efficiently. Now, in terms of cable length, it's a decent length cable. Obviously, this is not an ideal position because the cable is running across from where I'm working, but I don't have really any space on that side, on that side of the table to put this. So if I was going to be working, I'd have to have it running down off the table and back around rather than across the workspace. But I mean, it's a good amount of length. I would say it's, I can measure it, I guess, roughly 1 foot, 2 foot. It's like 2.5 feet. So 70 centimeters or so. And the power cable itself is a good length as well. I'd say it's probably close to maybe 80 centimeters. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the YiHua. It's cheap, 45 bucks Australian online. He said that the tips cost him, I think, 20 bucks. So all up, it was like a $65 buy. I bought it for much less than that. And I bought my TS100 for a bit more than that. So as a gauge, it's sort of a good price. And yeah, there's definitely a whole lot of different tips and replacement parts that seem to be available for it as well. So that's pretty much it. Now, before I wrap up, of course, on this video, I want to say a big shout out and thank you to everyone who's been supporting our channel. We're at 860 odd subscribers right now. We just recently drew the 800 subscriber video on the weekend, and David in Victoria, Australia, won the mug, and that's already on its way to him. So hopefully you'll get it soon, and it's going to be in a great condition, not smashed up or anything like that. Really love your work in supporting the board, as well as the fact that we've launched our Patreon campaign, and you can of course find links both here on our YouTube channel, and you can also find links on our podcast channel, website, at www.theboardpodcast.com. I don't know if we're going to do anything for 900. We'll just have to see how our finances play out. But I definitely want to do something for 1,000. So I might skip the 900 subscribers so that I can save up a bit more money and get something special. Well, not special, but something nicer to celebrate 1,000 subscribers. So obviously, if you're subscribed, fantastic. Thank you very much. Would love to keep you subscribed as one of our followers to the channel and the podcast series. If you haven't, would really love and appreciate if you hit subscribe. And of course, if you have friends in the community who haven't heard of us, get them onto us and hit that subscribe button as well, because it means they too will have a chance to be able to win whatever it is that we're doing for 1,000 subscribers. The other thing I wanted to show off today, just while we're waiting for this to cool off before I can pack it up, is a couple of videos back I showed off head cam. So it was basically just a visor that I had put together. It had magnifiers originally for sort of jewelry work, and I'd modified it to actually have a webcam on it so I could try and have a point of view camera perspective, kind of like how Ski with Pete from 1UP Keyboards has soldering can. I wanted a way that people could actually see what I was doing, rather than sometimes, when I tilt stuff in front of the camera, you can't really see it very well. And one of the comments that came from it was because of the lighting, the room light is actually behind me. So my as you can see from the way that the light changes as I tilt my hand, quite often on this table there's a lot of the shadows that are cast in front of me, and for the camera to focus as well as for soldering, or if I'm doing anything, it makes it hard to see and focus. So I was kicking around on eBay and looking for options, and someone suggested a LED ring to go around the actual webcam lens that I use. But I found a lot of them were really big, and it sort of made me think about how I could potentially mount it, because if they were actually bigger than the lens space, tilting the camera was actually going to be an issue. And I came across an eBay seller that had really small LED arrays, and it was actually really cheap to get one of these things. It was only a couple of dollars. It was like $2 for one of these things. So, but it needed 12-volt power supply, and I found a 12-volt power converter which takes USB 5-volt, and it can turn it into 9-volt. So this little baby can go, if it'll focus, come on, focus. There we go. So it can do 9-volt or it can do 12-volt, and all you do is just flick this switch. And it's really interesting because you'll see it also does 1-volt, 3-volt, 5-volt, 9-volt as well. So there's a whole bunch of different pins, pinouts that it can give you for different voltages, and you can do wires that can go straight into it, and you can even do USB out of it as well if you wanted to do some funky conversions. Very cheap. So as you can see, I've actually put the pins through that and I've tightened it down. It had a little like a black socket thing originally. It had that with it, sort of your standard connector, but the connector had actually no way of really, I suppose it could have gone onto one of these. Would it have worked? Yeah, it would have, but it's a bit loose, so not really happy with how loose that is. So therefore, I think my decision to do this pin method is probably not a bad one for now. I just wanted to test it quickly anyway. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you how bright this sucker is. I'm just going to point it off to the side and try not to electrocute myself. Oi, there we go. It's bright, right? Super bright. So I've definitely got a light source now that potentially can do the job and help with illuminating. It's just a matter of trying to figure out how to mount it and where I can mount it, because it does require the USB mini B connection to it. The other issue that I have right now is I'm actually running out of USB sockets from my computer. Oh, crikey. I'm trying to be careful so that I don't zap myself with 5-volt. So I'm running out of USB sockets, which means I probably need to get a USB port, USB hub or something like that. So that's on my next sort of list of small, cheap things to obtain, and that way I can power more devices. If you do have recommendations for something that's really simple and easy that I can get online and not through Amazon, because I don't have Amazon here in Australia and shipping might be an absolute nightmare anyway, from Amazon to Australia, maybe, who knows, then yeah, just let me know. That would be really good. Now I don't know which way these things are meant to go. Did I just put it in wrong? Probably just put it in wrong. Yeah, or something. Or I broke it. Did I break it or something? I don't know. Bent it too far. Worst case scenario, I can always just solder this thing. Because, well, I definitely have plenty of soldering capabilities, don't I, with this? Surely it doesn't go that way. Does it? No, it can't go that way. Doesn't fit that way. Alright. Well, anyway, that's something for me to figure out. And I think, yeah, that's how it went. Because that locks in right there. See, that's no good because the pins actually come out. Whereas I want something that doesn't have the pins coming out. I want something that's got a socket. And that's why I took it off. I knew there was a reason why this wouldn't work. So we can remove that again from that shell. Anyway, I'm rambling on now. I don't know when I can get this jigged up in a way that's actually useful or not, but we'll just have to see. That seems pretty solid. Oh, that's still warm. But I think I'm going to wrap it there and not bore you anymore. So thanks very much for everyone who's supported the channel and podcast. Once again, really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you on the next video, whenever that is. So, as usual, until next time, happy clacking.